Thank you, Matt and Chris, for your words. My part of this is the hypocrisy of the so-called pro-choice movement, and it is hypocritical to the core. I want to ask you a question as I get started this evening. Christ had some things to say about sin in general, and he had some things to say about sins also. He mentioned various sins. Do you know off the top of your head what particular sin he lined up the most? The sin that is mentioned the most times by Christ. He mentioned murder and lying, for example, in John 8. Accused his opponents there of being liars and murderers, being children of the devil, who was a liar and murderer from the beginning. We know when it comes to this thing here, this abortion horror, that the lie precedes the murder. But you always see the two together. You do not see the lie without the murder. So back to my question. What is the sin that Christ mentioned personally the most? Hypocrisy. And it is hypocrisy. It is. That may be somewhat surprising to you, but that is the one that he leveled his guns at the most often. I want to talk about that tonight. I want to also talk to you about what we often, as abolitionists, as people that say we believe in God, and as pro-lifers, moving towards abolition, I trust. And one thing about that I want to say tonight, some of you that have been around this battle for a long time know the name of Nellie Gray. Who here knows that name? Few of you know that name, absolutely. Yeah, Nellie Gray is called the founder, if you will, of the pro-life movement. But Nellie Gray was not a pro-lifer in the modern sense. She was an abolitionist. If you want to find out more about that, you can look up, well, it's actually hard to do, but it can be done. I asked a friend, and a friend of mine did this. He looked up Nellie Gray's interview with Ted Koppel on Nightline. Now, some of you may be more familiar with Ted Koppel on Nightline, and I remember tuning in one night, and it was like 11:30 at night. That's why it's called Nightline, I suppose. And there was Ted Koppel, and he had Nellie Gray on. Nellie Gray was such a mover and shaker. She was the founder of the March for Life on Washington every January. She was the one that founded that. She was on with another lady from, well, it was called Catholics for Choice. They were arguing back and forth about abortion. And Nellie Gray consistently said, I want a constitutional amendment banning abortion. I want nothing less. And after a while, the dear Catholic for Choice lady said, well, you see, we can't compromise with these people. We can't work with them. And Nellie Gray said, I'll never forget what she said. She said, no crumbs for the babies. What, are we going to save some and abort others? Yeah. We're not going to give them crumbs. Yeah. We want to save them all. I submit to you tonight that anything less is hypocrisy at some point. Some excuse somewhere to kill these and save these. And as I believe the gentleman who came before me pointed out so effectively, you can't sustain an argument like that. You will ultimately lose it. Just like we lost the supremacy of Christ argument back in the 1960s when the Church of Jesus Christ rolled over and played dead. Except I wish we were just playing dead. Oh, I wish that. You know, here they came along and said, well, you know what? We're going to throw out prayer and Bible reading. We're not going to be able to read the Bible anymore publicly. We're not going to pray publicly to the true God. We're not going to do that anymore. But we're throwing out all religions. How's that working out today in 2023? Jesus Christ is out, and everybody else is in. And that is what you get, my friends, with the hypocrisy of saying that Jesus Christ and the true religion of Christ is equal to everyone else. And see, that's what we said. We said that for the longest time. Pro-lifers have said this in their hypocrisy. We just want a place at the table. Have you heard that? Yeah. We just want a place at the table. My friends, who owns the table? If Christ really is and truly is Lord of all, then he is the owner of the table. What are we talking about a place at the table for? When we say those kinds of things, we say, you know what? Jesus Christ is equal to Muhammad. He's equal to Buddha. We have this big equivalency thing going on here. And as has been pointed out already, that is just not possible. But what do we run away from? What is it that we cower before? Slogans and bumper stickers that I'll talk about here in a moment. But if you'll forgive me, because I've mentioned this so many times before, I want to talk briefly about what Paul said, the apostle. He said he's not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. You know, that's all the baby killers have. Do you know that? The only thing they have is shame. They want to shame us. Somehow, and this is the problem with the pro-life movement. The pro-life movement, my friends, has been shamed into backing off for an argument like my body, my choice. And who are you to tell me? While they tell the baby what to do, and there we are just backing off of an argument like that. How shameful. Making us ashamed for not being compassionate while they kill babies. What has happened to us? This is not the first time, though. I want to read you an argument between some well-placed religious authorities and another man named Nicodemus. Some of you remember Nicodemus. Nicodemus, bless his heart, wanted to hear from Christ directly, kind of had to do it at night because he feared what would become of his position. We know that later on he gave up that position when he publicly worked with Joseph of Arimathea to remove the body of Christ. He was definitely giving up any kind of titles he had before in the religious arena. But we run into this argument he had with the authorities. And there's this fight. Some people believe that Christ is the Messiah. Some said this is the Christ. But some said, will the Christ come out of Galilee? You know, if you read Isaiah, that the Christ spent a lot of time in Galilee. That was from the Old Testament. That Galilee thing is going to come back. Has not the scripture said that Christ comes from the seed of David and from the town of Bethlehem where David was? Do a little bit of study. Isn't this our problem today, right? Throw up our hands. 3 minutes into our Bible study, can't figure it out. Who knows? Wouldn't it have taken that long to figure out that Christ was born in Bethlehem and he spent time in Galilee? That's in Micah and in Isaiah. By name. Bethlehem, by name. Galilee, by name. Well, listen to this. There was division among the people because of him. Now, some of them wanted to take him, but no one laid hands on him. Then the officers came to the chief priests and Pharisees and said to them, why have you not brought him? The officers answered, that the chief priests and the scribes, Pharisees, the officers answered, no man ever spoke like this man. Then the Pharisees answered them, are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed. Okay, so that's the argument number one that the hypocrites will use. All the smart people believe this. You're not smart. Have you ever run into that one? Hey, everybody believe abortion. It's all good. We've accepted. It's part of our culture. Who are you, you idiot? All the smart people, all the people that write the law journals, all the people that are elected, they all believe it. Old argument they're laying on Nicodemus here. Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? We're not talking about the merits of the case here. We're not talking about what he raised people from the dead. healed the blind, healed the lame. No merits of the case. Just, let's take a poll and see who the smart people and what the smart people believe. Almost sounds like believe the science. Nicodemus, who came to Jesus by night, being one of them, said to them, does our law judge a man before it hears him and knows what he is doing? Poor Nicodemus. He's trying to be reasonable with these people. He's trying to use a little logic, little good argumentation here. They're not interested. They turn on the shame. Do you think they deal with Nicodemus here? Back and forth on the law, the logic of the law and so forth, the nuances of the law. Think, okay, let's get off the law here. Let's talk, Nicodemus. Yeah, you got a point, good point there, Nicodemus. Let's talk law here. Not hardly. These big-time lawyers, these big-time people that are always lecturing everybody else about the law, look what they do immediately. Immediately. Next verse. I'll read Nicodemus. Does our law judge a man before it hears him and knows what he is doing? They answered and said to him, are you also from Galilee? You dope. You're talking like you're from Galilee. We all know they're a bunch of morons and idiots. Poor Nicodemus, all he really wanted to do was have a discussion about the merits of the law. And you know what they did? They shamed him. That's what they did. No discussion about the merits of the law. No discussion even about what the hotshot rabbis said. Nothing. Just pure shame. My friends, when you are dealing with hypocrites, you and I have to be willing to stand with Christ and let the hypocrites throw the shame around. Because remember what Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And then he goes on to talk about what people should have been ashamed about. He's talking about all kinds of vile things that people do with each other, things that should bring great shame. And my friends, for us today in this battle, we must be able and willing to be put to shame by wicked people, but be approved by Christ. And when it comes to shame, just had a conversation this recently with someone about the shame that Christ endured on the cross, dying like a common criminal. He was put to shame by wicked people, but his Father approved of him. We live in a time, my friends, when there's going to be shame all around. We need the approval of Christ, even if it means the disapproval and the shame of wicked people who want to kill babies. Don't ever forget it. People that want to kill babies want to put you to shame. Think of the hypocrisy there. Think of it. I want to deal with just a couple of slogans here before we wrap up here. I have a couple pages worth here. Freedom of choice. For the baby? Let's talk choice for the baby. You can't legislate morality. $70 million babies had somebody's morality legislated on them. Somebody's morality. You can't legislate morality. I submit to you, every time a baby is killed, somebody's morality has been legislated somewhere. Abortion should be a decision between a woman and her doctor. As my friend John Bingman says all the time, What's right? What's wrong? Says who? Says who? Between a woman and her doctor. Who says that? I think we're missing a crucial vote here. Maybe the baby, perhaps. What hypocrisy. And I don't need to go through all these. One of the worst ones for me is every child a wanted child. I still remember in a toe-to-toe battle one time at a rally that I was at. There was a young man there with a sign, every child a wanted child. And I went up to him. I said, every child a wanted child? Every child? He said, yeah, he said. This was years ago. I said, well, what about the children that are already born? Maybe they're not wanted. I think we have a whole lot of children who aren't wanted. I said, what about the ones that are born? He said, well, the same thing. I said, what do you mean the same thing? He said, well, the same thing. I said, you mean kill them? He said, yes. I said, no, I want to hear you. I want you to say it. You say it. I said it, and I want you to say it. Come on. Come on, you can do it. He was quiet for a bit. I said, come on. Say it, bro. You believe it. Let's hear your convictions. And he finally said, kill them. You see, he's being totally consistent. Why can't we see this? Why can't we see that he has to say that? Why can't we understand that? The hypocrisy is amazing. And shame on us if we get involved in the hypocrisy. But we have. I want to read a brief account here from George Grant's book, Grand Illusions, the Legacy of Planned Parenthood. He talks about this. He says, Richard L. Ford was the young idealistic pastor of a large Methodist church on the West Coast during World War II. Already thoroughly infected with liberalism, even then, his congregation sponsored several cooperative programs with Planned Parenthood. Quote, at the time we were giddy with excitement, he told me recently. We felt that we'd been sequestered in a religious ghetto, that we'd been irrelevant for years. Now at last we were doing things that made a difference in the world. Unshackled of every encumbrance, tradition, the Bible, everything, we loyally followed every new fad and fashion. End of quote. George Grant goes on to say, a funny thing happened on the way to relevance, however. I found that I didn't have answers anymore. Richard added, when people are facing a crisis, and this is this pastor talking, again, when people are facing a crisis in their lives, they don't need their pastor to experiment on their souls and minds with whatever the latest pop therapy is. They need answers. When teens are facing a barrage of temptation, you just can't turn them over to Planned Parenthood. That's like throwing gas on a fire. They need standards, solid and sure. End of quote. No longer able to provide his congregation with decisive guidance, Richard was left helpless in the face of a rapidly deteriorating moral climate. Pastor quoting again, there wasn't any such thing as sin anymore for us, he said. So, not surprisingly, we began to indulge ourselves. Illegitimate pregnancies skyrocketed, divorce rates soared, and the worse things got, the more we turned to the very organizations that prompted our demise in the first place. My friends, as it was said earlier tonight, it's Christ or Satan. It's Christ or Moloch. It's Christ or Baal. You see, at some point, we're going to be embarrassed by somebody. But you remember what Christ said? If you're ashamed of me and my words, I'll be ashamed of you. You're going to become an embarrassment to me. So tonight, your choice. Who are you going to be embarrassed by? Wicked people who kill babies? Who think men can become women and women men? Or the Lord of glory, Jesus Christ? And I thank you for your kind attention.